This is Alexandra Constantine, and you're listening to the Dicenius Review, where we discuss novels, film, art, and culture from a perspective outside the mainstream. The Review is a Substack podcast, but you can listen to us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and anywhere else via RSS. If you enjoy the show, please like, follow, and share this episode. Hey, so it's May 1st and a hot and humid afternoon here in the Low Country. We were scheduled to get a thunderstorm today, but it didn't happen. It must have moved on or something. Thunderstorms are one of the many things I love about living in the South compared to the weatherless Southern California I used to live in. Anyways, it's been about 2 weeks since the last episode, and a lot has come to pass. First of all, my wife and daughter convinced me to go along with them getting a new dog. We have an awesome dog named Quinn. She's named after Quinn from Daria, not Harley Quinn, all right? But she's a 10-year-old gentleman's couch terrier, okay? She prefers short walks on concrete, long nap sessions on the couch. And my wife wants a big dog, one she could take to the beach, hiking, running, exploring the swamp out here. So she went to a local shelter and brought home a puppy the other day. I have no idea what she is, the puppy that is. But I expect her to be big. She's already the size of Quinn, and she's only 7 weeks. I ordered one of those dog DNA tests and swabbed her spit and sent it in for analysis. So I'm going to post a picture on the Substack and let everyone guess what breed she might be, and maybe I'll give you guys a prize or something. Anyways, I'm really more of a cat guy. Dogs are fun, but they're too fucking needy for me. The other somewhat significant event was that last week was my birthday. I turned 41. And it's the first time I can remember that I actually thought about my birthday, because this one felt a bit different. Maybe because I'm starting to feel old. Maybe because I'm starting to feel my age for the first time. When you turn 41 and when you hit my age, you start realizing that, look, I'm not going to be an astronaut. I'm not going to be a rock star, right? And one of the things I realized is a lot of my memories, a lot of my reminiscences are about friends from the past. And I realized that I might not ever see these people again. I'm never going to run into the ex-girlfriend that I used to work at American Eagle with, or, the guys I used to party with in Long Beach and, smoke weed and fucking drink beer all day. I might never see those guys again. And that makes me sad. But it also makes me appreciate life. It brings a level of urgency to it. And at the same time, it also brings a level of freedom, a level of acceptance that this is who I am and this is who I'll be, and I like it. Anyways, today's guest, Caleb Caudell, is a fiction writer from the Midwest. I spent the last few evenings reading his excellent short story collection, Novelty, and I have his full-length novel, The Neighbor, queued up on my Kindle. The 16 short stories in Novelty are a blend of Midwestern realism and contemporary absurdity, in the tradition of Thomas McGuane and Rick Bass. My favorite is the title story Novelty, about dating and relationships in today's absurd present. Hey, Caleb, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, so tell us about yourself a bit. You're a writer. Why write? Why write contemporary literary fiction in this messed up, digital, obsessed world today?
Yeah, well, very good question. I need an outlet, selfish reason right off the bat. I do have a need for expression, but I also would like to do it somewhat quietly, not entirely, not in total obscurity, because I am putting material out there. But for me, it strikes this balance of expressive freedom and at the same time transmissibility, being able to put things out, but also conceal parts of yourself. You're not doing vlogs. We're talking now, but it's not as if I'm regularly out talking on videos or podcasts or things of that nature, from time to time. But yeah, there's something about the privacy, the initial privacy, maybe even in the creation of a work of literature, short story, any form of it, where you have to sit down by yourself and think and create some sort of inner space in which you can extract all of these details and present them to the world. And there's something I really enjoy about that. And even going beyond that, of course, the being able to remind people of things and to do it semi-covertly, being able to evoke and spark different emotions or reflections in people, and doing it in that long range, semi subterranean way where you don't have to walk directly up to them. You don't have to show your face. You don't have to expose all these other parts of yourself all at once. You can just share that one essential thing that you've been working on and distilling out of all these other experiences. I think that's very valuable.
Absolutely. And what I like about your writing, and what one of the things I do want to focus on this podcast and different episodes of this podcast, is that you are writing contemporary literary fiction. And it's so much of the independent fiction or the small press tends to be genre fiction, a lot of like fantasy, horror, that type of shit, right? Which it is what it is, and I like some of it. But you're writing contemporary lit fic, okay? That's what you're writing. And there's not a lot of indie or small press guys like you writing this lit fic, at least in our greater circles. I mean, you have Mark Marlowe, who wrote The Jackalopians.
Yeah.
And of course, probably the best writer out there right now, Delicious Tacos, in my opinion, and I'll stand by that opinion. And so why contemporary lit? Why not like sci-fi or something?
Yeah, the brutal initial answer is I am not interested. I don't care much for beyond there. I can make some exceptions, but they're all fairly superficial. Also, I do like Philip K. Dick and Asimov and Bradbury and some of the major figures of
The big
that.
guys, right?
Yeah, maybe a little William Gibson, but not much. But for the most part, no. I wonder if I have a problem with science fiction or with just science too. I don't necessarily think that science is always it. Of course, it can exert a fascination. It's worthy of reflection. It's worthy of being explored in all these different ways. But fiction, for me, I think can do something a little bit different that distinguishes it from science, and a scientific focus or such a strong scientific background in it, or an importing of primarily scientific terminology. I think while it can be done effectively, it doesn't cover the whole field of what literature can do. Literature can do much more that isn't dependent on that kind of scientific fictionalized scaffolding.
Absolutely. And I'm with you on that. While I do enjoy some of the great, science fiction and fantasy classics, for the most part, I'm a contemporary lit guy. I like lit fic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think lit fic allows us to, and that's the thing. A lot of literary fiction has sci-fi elements. It has mystery elements, genre elements, but there's something about it. There's a realism to it, even if the subject matter or the events aren't particularly realistic. There's a realism of like heart to it that sometimes is lacking in a lot of genre type stuff, which is focused on more entertainment as opposed to thinking or feeling.
Yeah, then they're much more plot driven typically, which is an art. It's perfectly respectable. People who can construct plots well are very skilled, and that's worth something. But the range of emotions and the psychological depths that you can touch on or reach down into, that's, I think, literary fiction broadly labeled or conceived. That's what that offers.
Right. So tell us a bit about yourself. I mean, how did you start writing? Did you go to MFA, or were you
No, I didn't
trained?
I'm a mixture of schooled and raw or feral, because my primary adolescent or childhood background is in music. Initially, I was a musician. I started on piano as a child, played the violin, and then as a teenager became enamored of the guitar, and I also played and studied classical guitar as well. I spent a year at the IU School of Music for classical guitar, and I was also playing in bands at the time, metal bands. There's quite a lot of crossover between classical and metal, something not a lot of people know, but
Right.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I did, at the time, especially in that adolescent way, think that I could pursue that throughout my life, or I could make a living out of it somehow, whether through performing or teaching. and I was very passionate about it, and I spent a lot of time practicing. But over time, I lost interest, first in some of the more commercial or public aspects of it, like touring, performing shows. I lost quite a lot of, I lost the savor for that. I don't know if you have any experience with that
Oh
sort of
no,
thing.
absolutely. So what's interesting is that you are like the seventh out of eight guests I've had on this podcast that were previous musicians or involved
Yeah.
in music. Every single one so far has been a previous musician. There's something of a musician to writer pipeline that seems to be normal,
Yeah.
including myself. I played a lot of guitar most of my youth, and I played in punk bands and a goth band. And
Mhm.
I quit in my 20s because it was like being married to like five other people, and it was
Yes.
not fun.
No, it's not. There's a certain level of extroversion that's called for, I think, in being a musician typically that I couldn't reach. I couldn't match it. And even the music itself, at some point I started, this might sound grandiose in a way or dismissive, and people who truly love music might not like it. I was hungering after, I was hungering for greater articulation, and music, for as evocative and powerful as it can be, it's never going to compare to literature in that fine grain articulation of states and description of things.
I agree. And, I don't know if you read some of my Substack stuff, but we were having a conversation on Notes today. The writer Alexander Helene, who's a friend of mine, and I've had him guest
Yeah.
on there. He just recently started a music review like Substack. That's something him and I were throwing around. And he's like, let's review music.
Mhm.
And he loves music. He writes a lot about music, and him and I share music often. And so I've been thinking a lot about music and the album and listening to full music. And he asked me, he's like, "Hey, I want you to pick a very contemporary, popular artist to do your first review on."
Yeah.
So I started thinking, like, who do I want to listen to? Who is the 21st century like artist that really defines the century so far? So my
Mhm.
initial thought was Amy Winehouse. I was like, okay, it's Amy Winehouse.
Yeah.
But then I thought about it, and Amy Winehouse, she's my age. She was born in 1983. If she was alive today, she would be turning 41, just like me in a few months. And I was like, so she's not really a 21st century artist. She's more of a, turn of the century millennial, kind of like me. So my final decision was Billie Eilish, right? And I don't know if you like Billie Eilish, but I think her first album's fantastic.
Yeah. Is that the one with, what is the song? Ocean Eyes? Is
Yeah,
that?
yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Oh,
Mhm.
both her studio albums are fantastic, honestly.
Yeah.
And I was listening to it, just kind of reviewing it so I could take some notes while I was driving to work this morning. And I was like, man, she wrote this when she was 17 years old.
Mhm. And
And I thought about age in music, and it seems that so many musicians put out their best work in their early years, whether they're like the 18-year-old, 19-year-old punk rockers in their early 20s. And if they do survive past 28, they tend to just become dull and repetitive, or they fall into a kind of obscure esoteric mode, which isn't
Yeah.
always bad. I mean, Nick Cave, for example, is fantastic, right? But a lot of the other guys they'll kind of do the same stuff over and over. I mean, The Cure's
Yeah.
still playing, but The Cure just plays Cure songs. They haven't done
Yeah.
anything new since the 80s.
We're stuck.
Right. So, but writers, though, on the other hand, writers tend to be better when they're older, in my
Yes.
opinion, right?
100% agree. Yeah, I think that's hard to argue against. Literature only improves with time up to the point of total senility.
Right, right. Or, I mean, yeah, I mean, look, Cormac McCarthy dropped the little duology thing, the Stella Maris,
Yes.
last year, and then he passed away. But I mean, you think about it, some of the greatest novels are written by men in their 40s or their 50s.
Yes.
Yeah, there's some fantastic, okay, there's some good stuff written by 19-year-olds. I think Bret Easton Ellis wrote Less Than Zero. But you read those books and they read like they're written by an 18-year-old,
Yeah. You read less than, I guarantee, yeah, you read less than zero. You're hearing the immaturity, the adolescent
Right.
quality It's coming through, and it's not positive. Yeah, you can break it down by decade as you age.
Right.
In your 20s, every now and then there will be a classic novel. Someone will write a classic novel in their 20s. It happens every now and then. Some writers are capable of that.
Right.
For instance, you've got a Fitzgerald or a Hemingway with a short story collection. These are serious works that stand up to time, and they were written when those men were in their 20s. 30s is usually the first solid cutoff. The way I look at it is that once you get into your 30s, that's when you start seeing people who have that talent already and that practice and that drive. That's when they start producing at least semi-mature work, something that is respectable. And then especially the truly great works tend to not be written for the most part until writers are in their 40s and 50s and beyond.
Right. Because you have something to say. And I've been writing my entire life. I think I started writing short stories when I was in high school, right out of high school. And I look back and it's not a technical issue, right? It's more of I had nothing to say.
Yeah.
I mean, what the fuck I was going to talk about, like getting dumped by my girlfriend. I mean, nobody wants to read that shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and it made me think like what makes writing and literature a medium that is so suitable for an older retrospective artistic element versus music, which is more raw. So I think music itself lends itself to a more raw, subconscious, kind of like, free emotional element that you tend to lose as you get older.
Yeah, I think there is something to that. Although I wonder, this isn't always my favorite mode of reflection, but I wonder to what extent the current cultural moment feeds into that condition there where, yeah, music now, as we tend to view it or experience it, is more a product of youthful aggression, youthful energy, raw exposition of these embodied states. But there are many modes of music, and several of them, it's possible to think of many styles, compositions, schools, eras where music, of course, music training begins early, but it's not necessarily something that explodes early in a person's life and then just trickles out from there.
Right. And that's, when I was thinking about this, I was driving, I was like, how about the classical music, stuff like Bach and like Beethoven and stuff, which tends to be more novelistic in its terms, like concertos and concerts and symphonies and stuff, which I'm not greatly familiar with like classical music beyond your basic kind of pedestrian knowledge of it. But that's something I've been thinking of. And I've noticed that so many of people on this coming onto the show were prior musicians. And I really love that. And how old were you when you started writing?
Well, I dropped out of the School of Music, and then for part of my 20s, that's when I started reading quite a bit more. I was going back to books that I'd either read in high school or was supposed to read and didn't read, classic works, modernists, things like that. And I went back to school late when I was maybe 23 and finished a degree in comparative literature, which definitely aligned with my interests as they were developing at that time, where I was reading Hemingway and Faulkner and also some philosophy, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, the German idealists. And I didn't really have a whole lot else to do. And it was around that time that I started writing on my own, non-academically, although probably way too influenced by academic writing, and maybe even still somewhat something I'm trying to shake a little bit. But probably I didn't start writing seriously semi-consistently until I was 26 or 7. And even then, I wasn't really sharing anything with anyone for a couple of years.
Okay. And then you wrote The Neighbor first, right? That is your first novel?
Yeah, I did start a blog around 29 or 30, and that was under a pseudonym. I was not writing under my own name or image. It was much more trollish and prankish.
Right.
But very very obscure. And yeah, the neighbor I wrote, I forget, I came out, it's been, see, I don't even keep track of these things. It came out in May of 21. So yeah, that's the first thing I wrote. Although I'd been writing some of the short stories and getting more comfortable with the short story form, although I do think it's very difficult to do it well. And I'm far from having a totally solid grasp on it. But short stories at the same time are a nice way to get into fiction. It doesn't feel so overwhelming initially. Of course, you come to find out all of the difficulties of short story.
Right. They're tricky because you have to say so much and so little, and they're a separate mode, a separate art form than the novel itself, in my opinion.
Yeah, but at least if you're not aware of all the intricacies of that, it's less intimidating to think, well, I only need to write 5 pages, uh, as opposed to 250 or something like that.
Right. Well, you're from the Midwest, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
Midwest is interesting. I've actually never been to the Midwest, right? But how does the Midwest influence you, right? How's it being a Midwestern writer? Like, is there a Midwestern literary tradition that influences you? Okay,
a
look, when I think of the Midwest, I think of Jonathan Franzen and The Corrections. That seems to be like the big Midwest
yeah,
novel in my mind.
that's the probably most current reference point for that. I guess when I think of that, and it's not even the strongest category to me, really, but I think more of Sherwood Anderson and Winesburg, Ohio, or Theodore Dreiser,
Okay.
Sister Carrie, or who else? Even this gets into a little bit more of the pastoral territory, but Wendell Berry.
Okay, Wendell Berry, right? And if you want to go genre, I think Bradbury writes about like Ohio or something like that.
Yeah, he's in there too.
Right.
Yeah, but for me, it is less about, let's say, claiming a literary heritage and more trying to take another step with a region, which of course has ties to the past, but is also entering into a different phase and is in need of new representations.
Right. I mean, I I grew up in Southern California. I'm originally European, but I grew up in Southern California, which
Yeah.
has a literary and film tradition of artistic tradition. So there's a California writing style. There's a California like
Mhm.
motif. And I recently moved to the South, to South Carolina in the Low Country, which also has a significant literary tradition. I mean, I live maybe 15 minutes away from, oh my God, I'm mind blanking right now. Uh, what's her name's house? Oh, shit. In Savannah,
Henry
Georgia.
O'Connor?
Flannery O'Connor, right? Flannery O'Connor's birth
Yeah.
home, home
Yeah.
of her birth, and the church she used to go to is like 15 minutes away from where I live.
Mhm.
And so there's definitely, with Cormac McCarthy also up there in Tennessee and
Faulkner, Carson.
Faulkner, right? There's so much of a literary Southern tradition that I
Yeah.
feel that there's a mode down here, which
Yeah.
is kind
Mhm.
of cool, but at the same time, it can be kind of stifling. It's like, here I am, a California guy in the
Yeah.
South writing shit. You know what I mean? Like, what am I going to write about,
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, and like I said, I've never been in the Midwest, but you guys have a different vibe up there. It's a different world, and it's not New York. And so much of everything is fucking New York when it comes to
Yes.
novels.
There's a lot of New York. There is still, I think, quite a bit of California, and there is more South. There isn't all that much from the Midwest, and it is difficult, I think, to pin down what exactly distinguishes the region, the people, that culture from these other regions in the U.S., artistically or otherwise. I don't know. I do, for the most part, appreciate my upbringing. I don't have any bitterness towards it, and I don't have any bitterness towards the surroundings of my upbringing. But I do think, and I say this with love, it will maybe sound somewhat negative still, but there is a dullness in the Midwest that also can be productive or turn into a rich vein of its own.
Right. That's really interesting, and I love the idea of place, right? I love the
Yeah.
idea.
Mhm.
I in my last episode, I had J.B. Jackson, who wrote one of the best little indie novels I've read in the last few years, called Shagdick, and really the main character of that novel is Texas, basically. It's Fort Worth,
Yeah.
Texas, and there's so much love and like detail of the city. It almost like you could not have that novel anywhere else besides Fort Worth.
Yeah.
And I love that about it. And you get that in certain novels, you get that in certain work and certain movies that you look at them, you're like, this could not be anywhere else. This is a product of that place, and this author could have not written this without growing up in that place. So I find the whole idea of where you're from and where you're writing fascinating, and how it affects your writing.
Oh yeah, totally. And yeah, that's one of the great things about so many of these works is that evocation of sense of place. You, even if you've never been there, you feel as if you're inhabiting that space. You're breathing in the air, you're taking in the sights. It's giving you a real window into what it's like to grow up and to soak in all that atmosphere of a place.
Right. I feel like I've lived in Knoxville after reading Suttree.
Oh yeah, yeah. Such is a really good example of a book that achieves that, and you do feel as if you are on location for that.
Right. You're like, God, I know. I had a I had like a phase where I was reading a lot of what's his name, John Clavel, like who wrote
Oh
Shogun,
yeah, like
and
a mass paperback kind of
yeah, like I think it
thriller.
was like 70s. I read Shogun,
Yeah,
and my favorite novel of his is
yeah,
Taipan, which is like the kind of like it's just like Shogun, where it's like real history, but it's historical fiction, and it's about Hong
yeah.
Kong and the founding of Hong Kong. And I love Taipan. It's just I love Hong Kong, and I read that novel and I became obsessed with Hong Kong that I went to Hong Kong. All right.
That's
And I
nice.
walked around Hong Kong and I drug my wife everywhere. And I'm like, this is Victoria Peak where they go in the novel. And
No, you have to read the book, and then you would appreciate it. Yeah,
right. And she's like, you're just crazy, dude. I'm like, okay, no, you have to see this. This is where the character stood and looked over the ships coming from,
right.
the India company.
So epic. Yeah,
And, it was crazy. My mom was like, you just ruined our vacation. But that's the kind of person I'm a big place person.
yeah.
Do you ever think of like moving to New York and doing a New York thing?
No, I don't think if I wanted to do that just for the private thrills, maybe it would be worthwhile, but I don't think I would want to do it for the sake of enhancing my writing or expanding its scope somehow. No, New York, I have enjoyed a couple of visits there, but there's no way in hell I would want to live there long term. That it would just absolutely crush me down into goo.
Right. I've actually, I I've only been to New York when I was like 7, and it was a quick visit, and I don't remember much from it. But I have no desire to go back. I'm sure it's a fantastic, wonderful city, but I feel like I already know it from all the movies and stuff. So
Well, yeah, and it's so heavily represented too. Why do I need to go there? That it's not as if, okay, at one time perhaps it made sense, or for a great span of time it made sense when the industry was more physically based, and you had to go to a specific place to gain entry into an industry or something like that. Oh yes, you have to go to New York, you have to go to LA. But for all the problems that arise from our current mode of living, one thing that we don't have to do anymore is move to specific places and hang out in the same physical spots. I can put out whatever I want from anywhere. I don't need to go be crushed in between cars and people and have people running up my ass every time I step outside of my door just to get a shot at making a name for myself.
right, and that's an interesting point because you know before the internet, before podcasts like this, where you and I can sit across the country and talk to each other on a fucking Thursday afternoon, you used to have to live in a kind of a close community. Like, those guys in the 80s, they all went to Florida for a while and they were doing the Florida
Yeah.
thing, like
Yeah.
McGuane. And they, all the guys did the New Mexico thing for a while. And that was a whole scene. Now we can have scenes completely disconnected from place where we share a stylistic language or a thematic language, but our scene is, strictly digital. Is that a good thing? I don't know. We're going to have to see that in the future, how it turns out.
Yeah. Probably not if we broaden it out as far as if we're thinking of whole holistic social health, it's probably not a good thing.
Right.
But that's also even that's something. Maybe this is a little tangential, but that's that consideration that the technological question is something that more lately I've almost been turning against. And like I said, I don't know if this is too much of a tangent,
No, no, go for it.
but I don't know. I maybe I'm prematurely tired, but is there not a little bit of a tired note in the technological question itself, in the focus or prioritization of questioning the effect of technology on the human spirit? It feels like it's really getting beaten
Oh
pretty
yeah,
hard.
absolutely. The whole okay, so I noticed like you don't have a huge presence online. I don't. And honestly, in the last, I would say maybe 6 months or really the whole year, I have just been tempted to just delete the whole fucking thing and
Very
go
tempting. It's
go
a daily.
analog. Yeah, go
Yeah.
fucking analog and never touch the damn computer again. Throw my phone in the toilet and because I am just fucking sick of online discourse. I'm sick of AI
Yeah.
bullshit and politics, and I'm sick of
Mhm.
fucking Ukraine and Israel. I don't give a fuck about any of it. I just want to read a book, and chill and drink a beer. And the internet and the whole discourse thing of like you have to put things out. It's so fake and so performative and so stupid, and I despise it. I don't even want to hear about it. And yeah, so I feel you. I feel you, man.
Well, and it's mixed though, right? Because if you do limit your view to how you can create something, you can write a story, you can write a novel, you can write a poem, and you can put it out and it can be then reflected on, it can be contemplated. That in itself, just limited to that, I appreciate that and I make use of that. But then when you expand it out and now it's, well, I need to tell everyone about how I'm thinking about doing this thing. But I wonder what they think about that. And that's where things get really noisy and distracting and even a little exhausting.
Right. To me, it's all the constant catastrophe. It's always the end of the
That too.
world, or nobody reads books. Everybody reads books. Nobody does this. Shut up. Just fucking chill, man. Like lay
Because
back.
you have to get attention quickly and you have to grab people with something that's shocking and offensive. But even then from there, the trying to slightly widen the scope, and I would just hate to only be known. I would hate to only be read. Let me put it this way. I want to be read because the writing is somehow estimable. It's worthwhile. I don't want to be read because someone needs a shock or it needs to be reminded of their own tenuous beliefs that they barely cling to but feel very strongly about at the same time.
Right.
Yeah, that's not. I think there's a way to do it. I actually do. You have to. It's always you have to evaluate where you are and how badly you're being sucked into different things that waste your time and energy. But I think it's worth it if you can limit the time you spend on that sort of thing and limit your exposure to it. And you really don't have to, if you want your strategy to be getting as big as possible, as quickly as possible, attracting as much attention as possible, then there are ways to do that and you can have fun with it. But I think you still can be an artist. You can create something of merit artistically, independently of whatever's going on. And you can put it on the internet. You can communicate what you're doing without being an obnoxious jackass about every single other thing that's going on in your life just to create more noise
Right.
around brand or something.
I think you should aim to be a writer who posts on Twitter instead of a Twitter writer.
Yeah, it's never, you don't want to go in the latter direction where, oh, well, once I post enough, then people will want me to write a book and then I might be able to cash in on it. That's really warped to me, at least.
All right. Absolutely. Talk about Twitter or X, right? I noticed that a few of your posts back, you were reading Mircea Cartarescu and you've read Solenoid, which Solenoid was probably my favorite novel of the last few years. What'd you think about
Really.
it?
Well, I have to correct you there. I read Blinding and
Oh,
not Solenoid.
Blinding. Okay. Have you read Solenoid?
Not read Solenoid. Have not gotten to it. Carterescu is a more recent discovery for me. I was not aware of him until I don't know, maybe a year or 2 years ago, and didn't even get around to reading anything of his until recently when I read Blinding, which I thought was fantastic. For the most part, was just a little bit of preciosity on occasion. He's a little precious
Right. So
here.
that is one of his older novels, right? And it's actually Blinding
Yeah.
is part one of three. And
Okay. Yeah.
it has not been fully translated yet. Part two and
Mhm.
three has not been translated. Um, and the translation from Romanian to English is not as good as Solenoid. Solenoid is like his masterpiece. Blinding is his like pre-masterpiece, which I equally like, but Solenoid is fucking awesome. I highly recommend it.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
I'll have to get to that soon because I was very impressed by Blinding. Like I said, only I think there were moments here and there where, and this is, no one is immune to this, I don't think, really. No one is perfect, but he lapses a little bit into, or where he strains after effect. And sometimes the imagery sometimes is extremely rich and mind expanding, even, but then there are moments where you think this is going a little far with the analogy or the simile.
right.
Somewhat similar to how I feel, although they're very different writers, but I feel similarly about Cormac McCarthy, who stretches his similes sometimes to the point where it's borderline comical.
Right. I mean, definitely you see that a lot in Blood Meridian, for example. You see a lot of it in
Yes.
Suttree.
Yeah,
Um,
Blood Meridian. I think that book is a little overrated in general, based on the way I see people talking about it. It's great. It's an achievement, absolutely, but there's a maybe a little too much hot air around it, and it is because there are these moments every now and then. So much of his imagery is incredibly powerful and richly detailed, but there are these moments where it's almost like he is his own auto generator or something of, and they rode across the plain like ghosts from hell. And sometimes you just think, yeah, did they really look like that?
right, right. And I will be honest here, and I'm probably going to get excommunicated from the literary church of the right, but I love Cormac McCarthy. He's a fantastic writer, but I do not like reading Cormac McCarthy. It's not.
Oh, yeah.
I'm much more into like more maximalist stuff like Pinchun and like stuff like the Savage Detectives 2666. I tend to like more modern theme kind of stuff. I actually really like Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men. That's actually my favorite McCarthy, which is like it's probably sacrilegious for everybody else, but
Yeah.
I like guns. I like the modern kind of border element versus the cowboy stuff. But I mean,
Yeah, that one's stripped down in a way that's pretty pleasing.
well, that's what I like about it. I like it stripped down more. I mean, I believe if I read correctly somewhere, he wrote it originally as a screenplay, and then
Yeah.
he turned it into a novel, and then it got turned back into a screenplay by the Coen brothers for the movie. The book is better than the movie. The ending's better in the book than in the movie. But I mean, overall, it's fantastic. My wife is a huge McCarthy fan, and she's read like all his novels. So I always try to catch up with her and read everything she does. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, what do you think about the whole autofiction thing? Okay, I know Cartarescu does it in Blinding. He does it in Solenoid. You got Bret Easton Ellis in his recent novel, The Shards. I don't know if you've read that one. And then the Nobel Prize winner for literature, John Foss. That was all autofiction. It seems to be like the thing right now.
Yeah, it is. It has been for a while. You could probably make an argument that for as long as there has been fiction, there has been autofiction. Maybe at least in the modern era. If we begin, say, with Montaigne and the essays and the
Right.
personal reflective mode of writing. And then it's not going to be long before that spills into fiction. But the current interest in it, I think it's definitely a mixed bag. And I think also it's a little bit of a whipping boy or some animal that you beat to take out your anger on. It's very easy / fashionable to casually condemn autofiction because what it suggests is that it's part of this larger problem of self-absorption and being unable to see beyond the self or to imagine anything which doesn't directly concern the self. It's a product of Christopher Lash's culture of narcissism, something that's creating this general condition in which people suffer and think they're much more important than they are. But right. when it's done well, and of course, autofiction can be it can be dull, it can be revolting, it can be so many things, but writers who are skilled can create a really good version of it. I am often a fan of it, just because it also it can get bogged down in psychological detail or personal detail, but I like the potential intimacy of it too, that it's not always getting swept up in these other currents. Like if the mind is powerful enough, if the mind is inventive enough, and the facility with language is strong enough, then it really doesn't matter. Somebody can write about their morning where nothing happens and it'll be captivating.
Right. And, I think often about, film and versus literature, film compared to literature, and what can a movie do that a book can't do, and what can a book do that a movie can't do. And in my opinion, books can do a lot more than film can do, obviously, because they're internal. While a film or a picture shows you something, one of the only things I think that movies can do better than books that never work in books is like car chases, or just chases in general. You can't do a car chase in a book.
I think film is the medium of visceral experience,
right?
And the novel is for interiority, for exploration of the psyche. It's remarkable how different they can be and what their strengths allow for. Because if you know how to write it, if you are in command of the language and you're in command of your own experiences and emotions, you can write about nothing, almost nothing to nothing, and you will say something.
Right. And I think maybe that's why autofiction, or this kind of personal first person kind of journal fiction, or the popularity of people's blogs or podcasts about their lives, is that we live in a very atomized, disconnected world, and we want to kind of spend some time to build a relationship, like a kind of like a what is the word for what is that word for a parasocial relationship with, like, the podcasters or the authors or the imaginary characters. And you often hear people say, oh, we live in the digital age with fucking people that only can look at text for like 10 seconds before scrolling, right? But then, ironically, the majority of novels that are popular are really freaking long, right?
Yes.
My wife is in a book club because, surprisingly, there's tons of book clubs and lots of reading around the south of South Carolina, right? And she's in a book club with a bunch of different women, and they read these like just tomes, like, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, War and Peace length novels about, wars and elves and shit and all kinds of fantasy stuff. And they're just reading these massive books. And people are going, oh, there's no attention span. I'm like, well, obviously there is an attention span because you have these 26-year-old women reading this stuff, right? So obviously there is something there. And I think that for the people that like to read, I think they prefer maximalism nowadays because everything else is so short and surface. That's my theory.
No, I think that's sound, because, and that applies to so many different facets of what you might create now and how you might think about it, because instead of trying to only appeal to the most degraded sense of what everyone thinks is going on right now, don't you want to offer something that's genuinely different from that? Like,
Right.
if why would I want to read a book that's a bunch of text messages? They're the equivalent of a bunch of text messages. That's all I already, at least in theory, that's what everyone's already doing the rest of the time. Why not? If they're going to read a book, don't they want to be able to sink into something with a little bit more substance?
Right. You want depth. You want to inhabit the world in a way, and you can only do that with a novel. I think. I think that's really the novel's strength versus film or the closest thing that a different medium can get to the greatness and the depth of the novel is like the long form television show, stuff like True
Yeah,
Detective,
yeah,
Breaking Bad and stuff. But even then, there's still a window between you and the characters. You're not internal. But in a novel, you can be there behind their eyeballs, behind their
yeah.
thought process, which you can never, film will never be able to achieve that until Elon Musk, wires our brain to the fucking internet with Neuralink or whatever. We're never going to get any medium that will ever compare to the novel, in my opinion.
So, and I can tell you right now, I am not linking up with whatever that is.
Right. I mean, I'm going to burn all my brain cells with alcohol way
Yeah,
before that's going to happen. I'm doing that as a preventative measure to avoid the fucking
right. I'm
cyborg
just pouring
apocalypse.
Everclear. I'm pouring Everclear.
There's not going to be one neuron to link into the Neuralink when
There'll
it
be
comes.
no cognitive harvesting of
Yeah,
anything in
sorry,
me.
bro. Nothing from me. Um, so we're still talking about writing because that's what we're really about, right? So the
Yeah.
online world, all the blogs, Substacks, Twitters, and live journals. I mean, if that's a thing anymore, it's all filled with these discussions about writing techniques, charts, breakdowns, save the weasel, and all that shit, right?
Yeah,
So,
rules. Here's what you do.
right, what is your writing technique, man? How do you write? What's your secret?
Yeah, well, it's pretty simple. I really don't pay much attention to guides. I am almost never interested in reading a book, much less an article on how to write. I think there is only one way to learn how to write, and that is to already be the kind of person who knows how to do it and then is also capable of studying greats before you and not copying directly what they do, but gaining an understanding of what you could do that carries that on. If you can't grasp that and you can't make progress with that, you can have a fun hobby and that's fine. But I don't know. I just don't see much use in. It all sounds like noise to me. I know that might be dismissive. I don't mean it to be
No, I'm with you. I'm the most dismissive
insulting or
person.
anything. I don't mean necessarily to be all that dismissive, but I guess at the same time, I do think, yeah, there's not a lot you can get out of writing about writing as a technique explicitly that you wouldn't already pick up if you were capable of doing it through your study and your own practices. And I think it serves as more of it's a valve of sorts to feel like you're doing something that's related to the craft, but really you're talking around it mostly.
Right. And I'm with you. I think the whole idea of, these guys like that do like story charting and breakdowns
Yeah,
and outlines and stuff. I'm like, shut up, man. Just write. And I'm going to get a lot of shit for this. And I got a lot of shit for this online. I'm like, listen, you can learn how to write. You can learn how to write well, but you'll never be a great writer unless you're born a great writer. I'm sorry. That's my opinion. I think that there is something as fucking mystical talent. And I think the greatest writers, the Dostoevskys and Tolstoys and Fitzgeralds, I think they tap into like a psychosphere, some kind of a, Jungian space where
yes.
they channel that stuff. And it's once in a lifetime, or maybe twice in a lifetime, or maybe 5 times if you're Dostoevsky or something. But
Yeah.
that is beyond learning. It's a mix of talent, life situations and just divine like magic in a way.
I was going to say that that's fate at that point,
Right.
that level. Whatever you believe, that's the roll of the dice. That's the cosmic gamble. You're given that at the outset, or you're not. Many people can be trained to be competent writers, to be clean or efficient and clear in how they express themselves. That can be schooled. But on the level we're talking about, in the sense in which we're talking about it, the kind of writing that deeply affects people and maybe even alters the way they think about things or gives them a genuinely new way of looking at or thinking about things, that there's no article, there's no technique, there is nothing that you can pick up from anyone else that will give you that.
Right. And and that applies to music, to take it back to music, I'm sure, going to music school and being a musician yourself, you've probably known guitar players or drummers or, other, instrument musicians that you would consider probably the best in the world, better than any popular musician that's ever existed. There's probably a guy right now sitting in some fucking basement somewhere playing guitar, and this guy is a prodigy. This guy is amazing, right? But nothing he will ever put out technically will mean shit, right? And then you have
Yeah.
some heroin junkie like Kurt Cobain who writes a 3 bar, song like "Smells Like Teen Spirit," which changes the fucking
Yeah.
music scape of of the end of the 20th century. All right.
Yeah. Which
Um,
is also why I think, related to this, the worry that people often have, the concern, the consternation, the anxiety around how do I become known, or do I deserve to be known? I've done this, I should have this level of attention or notoriety. All of that really is out of your hands. That is another stroke. That is something of fortune that is either bestowed upon you or not. And you should not waste that much time worrying about
right.
that sort.
Because you can be like Kafka, who wrote all the stuff and nobody knew about him until after he passed away.
Yes.
Oh,
Or and that could have there that was just a moment from all being burned anyway. That was
right,
those were Kafka's intentions anyway. You have to assume you could look at where you are. This is broadening it out a little bit. You could look at where you are as a writer, as an artist, and think, wow, I'm not getting a lot of attention. And then you start thinking about, well, how do I get more? But instead of thinking about that, you should think, there's someone right now that absolutely zero people know about, who's not promoting themselves at all, who smokes me into ash.
right,
So I need to be as good as I can be, regardless of whoever, whatever recognition I receive from people who my own respect for hinges on their recognition of me.
right.
You,
And I
you can
think you
just put it.
should write. Listen, I think you should write if you have to write. Like there is absolutely fucking nothing else you could do. Because
Yeah.
ultimately, writing is not that cool. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Like if you really want to get
it's quite
famous, you can
pretty
start,
doable.
yeah, you can do a million other things that are way cooler than writing. I mean, shit, you can start an OnlyFans and probably make more money than you would selling your stuff on Amazon, okay?
That is, I mean, that's a nice way of crystallizing what is almost even perplexing to me about that issue or that kind of concern, because you have chosen to do something which, by virtue of its place in the cultural continuum now, is it's going to work against you. It's not going to attract a lot of attention, and not a lot of positive attention anyway.
Right. And, I was reading, there was like a Substack a few days ago, and there was a big comment conversation. It's the perennial annoying thing of nobody buys books and the book industry. And I'm like, who gives a shit? Who
Yeah, it doesn't.
cares? You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
how many
Like,
people need buying books anyway?
right.
How
Like,
many people do you
honestly,
need?
if like you read my book, I'm happy. I'm not doing this to
Yeah,
make money. I'm not going to make money because you look at things and some of the greatest writers of all time made nothing and they died in
yeah,
some
e-
cockroach infested fucking Russian pit somewhere. And it's like,
exactly what I plan on doing.
right,
That is my
exactly.
retirement.
I want to be sent to Siberia And
Yes, I am destined for the gulag.
yeah, that's what I mean. That's what's going to happen to me for sure when this podcast gets out and it becomes popular. I'm
Yeah,
going to go straight to the gulag, and
it's
that's
allowed.
yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like that's what's going to happen. But you see these guys like, oh, this is 10 ways to get people to read your book. No, I don't give a shit, man. Just write.
And think it through. Have a little like anchor yourself for a second, right? Because it's very easy to get caught up in the idea, the image of thinking you want something, but then think it through a little bit. Do you really want that? You think, oh, if I'm known, if more people know of me, that will mean money and adoration, maybe, but it will also mean many more people who now with inexplicable fury hate your guts
Right.
and sometimes want to tell you about it and want to go out of their way to make you feel bad now because you've intruded upon their psychic space. Think of the general person, and I'm really not even trying to be especially misanthropic right now, but do you really want any random ass person? You want that much attention, you want that much scrutiny, which can't have any basis in anything you would respect in the first place.
Right. Exactly. And do you really want to be J.K. Rowling, where you have a bunch of
Yeah,
crazy people fucking trying to kill you online and stuff
you got to
because
be.
you
That's what. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I know
sounds like a
it's
nightmare.
be careful what you wish for. Be careful in ordering your desires. Don't get too far ahead of yourself and thinking that there are all these things that you should be chasing after, which, if they happened, if you caught up to them, would actually make your life much more complicated and sometimes bring much more suffering.
And ultimately, writing is not cool. Take some of the coolest writers, like Michelle Welbeck, everybody's favorite right now, and go walk down the street at your local restaurant or something and ask 20 people if they've heard who the hell Michelle Welbeck is, and not one person will know.
Yeah, and also going even farther, he's not even cool anyway, nor does he need to be. Hang out.
Right.
Why would you? But he shouldn't have to worry about that. Neither should I. And that's part of what I think is the beauty of writing in that medium is that I can still appreciate what he's doing. I can take something from it because it's
Right.
well made.
Right.
But I don't have to think, well, would he be cool with me or should we hang out or what if I don't like
No,
him? It doesn't
I don't
matter.
want to hang out with him. He's gross.
Yeah, I
He's
really
a
don't.
hideous
Yeah.
troll. He's French
Yeah.
for once, and nobody wants to hang out with some
Yeah,
chain
that's a but
smoking
see,
French pervert.
well, and the French are a great example of that because I will read me some Frenchmen, but I do not. I've never thought I wish I could hang out with a Frenchman.
Right, right. Nobody wants to hang out with Celine. Okay,
No, yeah, but he's a riot on the page. He's a great time.
right. One of the greatest
But
20th century writers, and I think what we were talking about Emile Cioran earlier, and didn't that guy think that? Him and Ernst Younger thought that Celine was a little bit too extreme
yeah,
on the right wing stuff. They're like, hey, I might be a Nazi, but this dude is a Nazi.
yeah, this he takes it to another level. But most of the to me the writers I like most, I really don't find myself ever thinking, God, I wish I could just talk to him or wish he knew what I was up to. I don't want that kind of relationship with artists in that way. And
Right.
I don't necessarily, people think you have to do that now. I'm not, you don't have to be a complete asshole to anyone who approaches you, but you don't have to pretend to be chummy with everyone just because they show some interest in what you're doing.
Right. I don't want to be the word I despise now because it's completely used right. Community.
Yeah,
I don't
well,
want to be a fan. I'm not a fan of a writer. I
it's,
enjoy writing. I enjoy reading. I don't want to be a fan of a person. I don't want to be
yeah,
part of their
no,
fucking community or whatever. Like you're not my neighbor.
yeah,
You're not my brother. You're not my. Just go away, man.
yeah.
I don't want that.
And think about if I've created something, if I have something out that has resonated with you or sparked something, then take that with you in your life. But it also doesn't then mean that now we have to go back and forth for the
Right.
rest of our lives.
And there's, I'm going to belabor the point, and we've talked about this a little bit too long, but there's an element where part of this fandom community situation puts writers, well, puts all artists, whether it's musicians or actors or writers or whatever, on this strange guru pedestal
Yeah,
where people are like, oh, this guy now has to opine about politics and current events and the flu and all fucking wars in Zimbabwe or whatever. And it's like, really, man, this dude wrote, a sci-fi story about lasers and shit. What the fuck do I
Yeah.
care what he thinks about,
Yeah.
Ukraine or something like that? You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
get like
Yeah.
these
It's
jackasses like Mark Hamill opining about politics on Twitter. It's like, dude, you're Luke Skywalker. You were in one
yeah.
fucking or three movies when you were like a
Yeah.
teenager. You're not a UN representative or a fucking scholar of politics. Okay, shut up.
And if you want to blow off some steam, go hang out with your actual friends or family or people that are in your life.
Right. And
And
that's who you
yeah,
should talk to, not people online. And in the other way, like we shouldn't expect our writers or our celebrities to be these priestly, well, and that's what they are. We've made them into priests of the modern world, where we expect them to be paragons of our current culture, when in reality,
yeah,
we're just normal people. We got wives, kids,
yeah,
we're drunks, we're not drunks, we smoke cigarettes and all this stuff. And that's how it should be. And there should be a level of separation between the work of art and the actual artist himself. All right, I'm
yeah.
been ranting about this one for a while though. So before we call it a night, right? What what are some writers that inspired you? What would you recommend listeners of this podcast read to kind of understand you?
Well, there are a few big ones, although some of them are farther back, and I've picked up more recent influences as well. But an early one that I don't think is necessarily all that applicable to me anymore was Faulkner. I really loved his books in my early 20s, and that planted the seeds. I didn't necessarily start writing right away, but by the time I started writing more, I was very heavily influenced by that Southern Gothic style.
Like
And then
as I lay dying, Absalom, Absalom.
yes, yes, Absalom, Absalom, As I Lay Dying. It was The Sound and the Fury, the big four, Light in August. But even some of the lesser known works, I liked Sanctuary quite a bit. That was very influential to me as his attempt at a pot boiler, which still, of course, it's Faulkner. It's not really a pot boiler.
Right.
But and then Flannery O'Connor, the heaviness and the texture, the sweat and the grime, and the unflinching kind of look at the darker side of a humanity that enslaves itself and tortures itself. That I was getting from Southern Gothic pretty early on, I think. But then also I was heavily influenced by certain philosophical figures, not just fiction writers, but like Chauran and Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, these very powerful and dark, pessimistic reflections on existence. That was also very influential, not just on my outlook, but on my writing style as well, I think.
Okay, like the continental German philosophers and the
Yes.
French
Even
guys.
though I still, at this point, I don't want to be, I wouldn't want to cling to that too closely, or I don't want to reproduce a purely philosophical discourse. But early on, that was pretty strong.
Right. Well, that's awesome, man. We share a lot of the same influences. I tend to, in the same way you're into the Southern stuff, which I've recently gotten into as opposed to starting with it. I've always been a Russian literature guy. I'm a Dostoevsky, Tolstoy. That's kind of where, that's my main love, if I were to pick anybody. And I've recently kind of pivoted to reading a lot more American writers like Faulkner and
Yeah.
going back and exploring Fitzgerald again. I've reread his short stories and I'm like, man, this guy. I reread The Great Gatsby actually in one night. And you read that
Yeah.
and you're like, this is a fucking masterpiece. That first chapter is some of the best writing in the 20th century of American literature, hands down.
Yeah. It's unparalleled.
And it gets ruined because you're kind of forced to read it in school and you don't
Yeah.
appreciate it. You cannot appreciate it as a high schooler. It's a novel for a 30-year-old.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's what it has there's a subtlety to it. There's a quality or beauty to the prose, which is it's lyrical, but it's not overstated. It's just understated enough that, yeah, especially if you're a teenager, you're not going to get it. You're not going to know why it's so good.
Right. And adults don't get it. I mean,
Oh yeah.
every single director and filmmaker that's made The Great Gatsby into a movie completely misses the point because
Yeah.
they make Gatsby cool and he's not. That's the whole point,
Oh,
is that he is sad.
yeah, but there again, that translation into film, I think, has a lot to do with
Right.
that.
He is a complete sad case. You don't want to be Gatsby. It's a warning. It's like, he's
Fitzgerald
basically
is he's an extremely melancholy figure.
right. He's telling you, Fitzgerald is telling you that, like, chasing Zelda was horrible. You know what
Yeah,
I
right.
mean? Not
No,
worth it.
yeah, he has this very superficial association with the Gilded Age, the Jazz Age, the excess, the noise, the commerce, and everything. But Fitzgerald is a melancholic writer. His stories have a serious sadness to them, which I think it genuinely stems from who he was and how he lived. Also,
Right. A Midwesterner.
yes, who stumbled out ahead of himself and attained a kind of success which in the end undermined him or undermined his particular constitution. He could not handle it. Really, if you want to get into some deep Fitzgerald, you've got to check out, also in the auto-fictional vein, you've got to seek out his collection of essays. I guess you can call them essays, The Crack Up. Later in his life, he wrote, there's a collection called The Crack Up, which
Right.
is,
That's in his Los Angeles days, right?
yeah, towards the end, before close to when he died. And he is seriously grappling with something that I think many people would struggle to be honest with themselves about, which is, my best days are behind me. I peaked too early. I can still do something, but really I'm empty inside.
Right. And hey, I turned 41 last week and I feel it. Did I peak early?
Yeah.
Right.
No, I've had those moments too where I think I'm not the man I was in some ways and never can be again.
Right. And Fitzgerald is so interesting because he is a Midwesterner that became famous through this weird connection to the South through Zelda and the whole debutante family thing going on, and then became part of the New York, international New
Yeah.
York, Paris kind of group with Hemingway and those guys. And then he ends up, dying of alcoholism in Los Angeles as a failed scriptwriter. And it's such
He
a
thought,
tragic story.
yeah, he died thinking he had failed.
Right.
He's
And
not, yeah, and that's there's a I forget who says it. It's a from one of the ancient Greek tragedies going all the way back that let no man say he's happy until the day that he dies.
right. That's a beautiful way to put it. All right. So before we get going, because we've been talking for about an hour and a half now, are you working on anything new? You have Novelty, the short story collection, and you've got The Neighbor, your novel. What's next?
All right, I'm only going to say this. I am working on a couple of different things, which I intend to be substantial and lengthy, but I'm not going to say anything else about it because I think there's way too much of that premature hype, and I don't want to put too much out ahead of myself without taking every step of the way and being sure in what I'm doing. But I definitely am working all the time, working in the sense of at least sketching out possibilities. But there are some major projects in the work. But yeah, no need to talk it up too much at this stage.
No need to shill ahead of time. Well, you're welcome
No,
to
yeah,
cut.
it's not. Yeah, I don't need to think of a promotional program yet, or think of an elevator pitch. What I would like to do is, even you heard me saying this here, but from here until pretty much when it's ready to come out, I would prefer not to even say things about it.
That's perfect. I'll accept
I
that.
just, it's more, I don't know. I respect that more. I think it's better to work very hard and put something out, and then to let people find it if they want
Let
it.
it come out organically. But
Yeah. Mhm.
you're writing your Substack, right? So I'm going to link to that on this podcast Substack, and I know you got your Twitter, which you
Yeah.
seem
I'm
pretty active
I
on there.
Well, I used to be more active, and by active, let's put it somewhat in context. Maybe tweeting once or twice a day, not actively, not participating in group chats or creating rolling threads day after day. But that has dwindled, especially in the last week or
Because it's
two.
horrible.
Yeah,
Twitter's
it's
become
it's not
horrible.
it's not even useful, even if you want to take the more self-interested route of, well, how do I promote my writing elsewhere? It's not even effective for that anymore. So what purpose does it serve other than playing a really cheap and stupid video game?
Right. And it's crazy. I used to have a Twitter account that had a few thousand followers on it. And I was addicted to it for a few years and just spent a lot of time just bullshitting on there. And
Yeah.
I deleted it last year when I went to Europe for a few weeks. And I didn't realize that if you don't like up it after certain days, it just goes away forever. So
Yeah.
I lost my account, which was a blessing, to be honest.
Yeah. You
And I,
didn't lose any.
yeah, and I recently started a new one because mostly because I needed to contact people for this podcast. There was people that
Useful for that.
yeah, people that didn't follow me. So I was like, okay, I'll make a Twitter and then I'll use that just for that. And every now and then I sign
Somewhat.
on. Horrible.
Yeah, it's somewhat useful for limited networking where you can send people messages. You can extend a line of communication a little bit. But as far as the grinding, like character building, increase your stats, try to no,
It's horrible.
it's broken and you're not going to be served.
And it's so insidious because, I'll open it up and I'm sitting at work and I've got some time to kill and I'll look through it and I'll see something by like Dasha from Red Scare or something like that. And she posts something stupid and then like 100 people comment insulting her and then vice versa. And it's back. And then 30 minutes pass. I'm like, fuck, did I just spend 30 minutes of my life looking at this stupid shit that I don't even know any of these
Yeah.
people? I don't want to know these people. What am I doing with my life? But,
Yeah.
that's the fucking future, right?
And the beauty is you can just not look at it.
Right. I mean, at the same
It
time,
all goes away.
you can just put down the crack pipe, right, or put down the beer. But
You could. You can do that. Yeah.
yeah,
One
easier said than
thing.
done, there, Caleb. Man, come on.
I know. Sorry for being glib about this, but
No, it's true though. It's true.
you want some practical. I'm not much of a practical advice giver, but if anybody, if you feel that impulse, if you find yourself getting sucked up into that, instead of thinking of how you want to participate in the discourse, just go write something somewhere, either in a Word document that no one sees or on a notepad, some pen and paper. Write out what actually does something for you
Right. You
and
know,
advance some project of your own.
what's funny? So I have a two-story house, right? And it's my office is in my spare bedroom on the second floor, and the internet down here in the south is not the best. Like the area I live in is fastly developing, and the infrastructure hasn't caught up with the development yet. So the internet's probably like 10 years behind California. So it's slow, and the wireless is even slower than the normal. So I never get good signal up in my office. And I'm like, man, I should get like a repeater thing or something. But then I told myself, I'm like, you know what? I like having shitty internet in my office because it
Yeah.
keeps me from going online. It keeps me from, it makes internet, like going on the internet so shitty that I don't want to do it. So I'll focus on
Yeah.
writing. And it
Is
was kind
it?
of a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, that I think that sounds good to me. I like that. I think limiting your sometimes you have to get creative in how you limit yourself, and that's almost the bigger danger is not knowing how to do that.
Right, absolutely. All right, Caleb. Hey, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you on the show, and consider this an invitation that's open for the future, okay? And for listeners, remember to follow, like, share, and discuss today's episode. Go to Caleb's Substack. I'm going to post it. Pick up his books. They're fantastic. And share this conversation across as many platforms as possible. Thank you, Caleb.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, good night, everybody.